Hi everyone, and welcome to Hauntora. If you're new here, make sure you hit that subscribe button. This is the place where we explore the darkest, most deeply unsettling true horror stories the internet has to offer. And if you've been here before, welcome back. Genuinely glad you're here. I need you to stay with me tonight. Not as a request, as a warning. Because what I'm about to share with you is the kind of thing that doesn't clock out when the video ends. It follows you into the quiet, into the dark behind your eyelids, into that half second before sleep pulls you under. I've been doing this long enough to know the difference between a story that scares you and a story that changes something. Tonight is the second kind. Links are at the top of the description. Go find them after. Don't leave yet. 2 stories. I've been holding on to them longer than I've held on to anything on this channel. Not because I wasn't ready to post, yet because I wasn't sure you'd be ready to hear them. I still don't know if you are, but I think that's exactly why we have to go there. The first one will get under your skin. The second one, and I am choosing my words carefully here, the second one will still be sitting in the back of your mind 3 days from now. I can almost guarantee it. I know, because it's still sitting in mine. When it's over, don't just close the tab. Come to the comments. Tell me what it did to you, because I think some of you are going to need to talk about it. Lights down, door closed. Let's go. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. I'm not a paranoid person. Never have been. I grew up in a family that solved problems with tools and logic. My father was an electrician. My mother ran the books for a small construction outfit. And between the two of them, superstition never got a seat at the table. If something broke, you fixed it. If something scared you, you figured out what it actually was. That's how I was wired. That's still how I'm wired, even now, even after everything. My wife and I moved to the property 8 years ago. 11 acres in a part of the Appalachians that I won't get specific about, not because I'm being dramatic, but because we still live there and I'd like to keep it that way. The land had been in her family for 2 generations, a mix of cleared pasture near the house and dense hardwood forest that ran up the ridge behind us. We'd both had enough of the city by then. She'd left a hospital admin job. I'd been doing structural inspection work for 15 years, and the commute alone was eating 4 hours of my life every single day. The move made sense. The quiet made sense. We wanted a dog, a garden, and enough distance from other people that we could actually hear ourselves think. For the first 2 years, it was exactly that. Quiet. The good kind. Deer in the pasture at dawn. Wild turkey cutting through the tree line in October. The specific smell of the forest after rain that you genuinely cannot describe to someone who hasn't stood in it. We learned the rhythms of the property the way you learn the sounds of a house. What was normal, what was seasonal, what was just the land doing what land does. By year 2, I could tell the difference between wind in the upper branches and wind at ground level just by the sound. I knew which part of the ridge the coyotes used on their nightly circuit. I knew the property. That's what made the van so strange. It appeared one morning in late October, parked on the county road that runs along the southern edge of our land. An older cargo van, dark green, no markings, parked on the gravel shoulder about 60 yards from our fence line. I noticed it from the kitchen window while I was making coffee, just a shape in the early gray light that hadn't been there the night before. I didn't think much of it. People pull off on that road sometimes. Hunters use the area. I went about my morning. It was still there that afternoon. And the next morning, on the 3rd day, I drove down to the fence line on the ATV to get a better look. The van was parked with its nose facing the tree line on our property. The driver's window was down despite the cold, and there was a man inside, middle-aged from what I could tell, wearing a dark jacket, holding a pair of binoculars, trained on the woods behind our house, not on me, not on the house, on the woods. I sat on the ATV for a minute watching him. He didn't react to my presence at all, didn't lower the binoculars, didn't turn his head, just kept watching the tree line with a kind of flat, patient attention that was, I don't have a better word for it than wrong. Not aggressive, not furtive, just wrong. Like watching someone stare at a wall. I went back inside and told my wife. We agreed I'd call the sheriff's non-emergency line if he was still there the next day. He wasn't. The van was gone by morning, and I convinced myself it was a wildlife observer, maybe a birder, maybe someone doing unofficial trail scouting. Reasonable explanations. I was good at reasonable explanations back then. 3 weeks later, I found the deer, or what was left of it, in the pasture, maybe 40 feet from the fence line, in the high grass along the eastern edge. I almost stepped on it. What stopped me was the smell, sharp and dark and wrong, in a specific way that hit the back of your throat before you'd even processed what you were looking at. The carcass had been not eaten. That's not the right word. Torn apart is closer, but even that's not accurate. The remains were shredded in a way I'd never seen a predator work. Not bear, not coyote, not cat. I've seen all three make kills on or near this property. The pattern is different. There's a logic to how predators feed. So efficiency, direction, specific anatomical targets. This had no logic. It looked like something had taken hold of the animal and pulled in multiple directions simultaneously. The bones weren't cracked for marrow. They were snapped in places that didn't correspond to any leverage point I could identify. I photographed it. Sent the photos to a wildlife biologist I'd worked with on a project years before. He looked at them for 2 days and came back with nothing. Said he'd share them with a colleague. Never heard another word. The marks on the fence post I found the following spring. On the wooden post at the northeast corner of the property, closest to the ridge. Deep parallel gouges in the wood, 4 of them, spaced unevenly. I got out my measuring tape because that's the kind of person I am. The lowest mark was at about 4 feet off the ground. The highest was at 8 feet, 2 inches. Whatever made those marks had drawn its hand, or whatever it used, downward across the post in a single motion that spanned more than 4 feet of vertical space. I've seen black bear claw marks on trees. These were not bear marks. The depth was wrong, the spacing was wrong, and the height, a bear rearing up to mark a tree tops out around 7 feet, maybe a little more. 8 feet, 2 inches is not a bear. I replaced the post and didn't tell my wife about the measurements. That was a mistake. Not because she couldn't handle it, she's steadier than me in most situations, but because keeping it to myself meant I was the only one watching for it. And I started watching for it constantly, in that low-level, draining way that doesn't look like fear from the outside but hollows you out over time. I checked the fence line every other day. I started leaving the motion-activated lights on all night. I bought a trail camera and mounted it on the northeast corner facing the ridge. Most mornings I'd check the footage before coffee. 11 months of nothing. Deer, turkey, 1 bobcat. Wind moving the branches. Then November came. My wife had gone to bed early. I was up late finishing some inspection reports at the kitchen table. The kind of work that keeps your hands busy but leaves your brain half free, which is maybe the worst state to be in when something happens. The motion light on the back of the house kicked on at 11:40 p.m. I registered it without really reacting because it trips for deer at least twice a week. I kept typing. It didn't go off. Those lights are set to cut out after 90 seconds. At the 2-minute mark, I noticed it was still on. I got up and went to the back window. The pasture was empty. The light was washing the grass flat and white, and there was nothing in it, nothing at the fence line, nothing that I could see at the edge of the tree line. I stood there and looked and felt the particular quality of stillness that the property gets at night in November, that specific absence of wind and animal sound that happens when the temperature drops fast. Then I saw the eyes, low at first, at roughly the height you'd expect, knee height maybe, the kind of reflective catch you get from a deer or a dog. 2 points of pale greenish light at the edge of the darkness beyond the fence. I stared at them. They stared back. Then they started to rise, slowly, not like an animal standing up, more like something was extending. The eyes rose past hip height, past chest height, past what a standing man would produce. They kept going. My brain was running calculations it didn't want to run, checking heights against the fence post, against the tree line, against the motion light's known range. The eyes stopped rising when they were somewhere between 9 and 10 feet off the ground. They stayed there for a long moment. Then the impact hit the side of the house. Not a knock, not a bang, a full force impact that shook the window frame I was standing at and knocked a framed photo off the wall in the hallway. The sound was somewhere between a collision and a concussive pressure, something that you felt in your sternum before you heard it. I was on the floor without deciding to be. I don't remember moving. My wife was in the hallway. I told her not to come closer to the back of the house. She listened. I don't know why she listened without asking questions, and I think she heard something in my voice. We stayed in the interior of the house until dawn. I had the rifle my father-in-law left us. I sat in the kitchen with it across my knees and watched the doors and did not sleep. In the morning, I found a single mark on the exterior siding. 1 point of contact, roughly 8 feet up the wall. A depression in the boards, like something had been pressed against the house with enormous force. No fingerprints, no claw marks, no blood, just a depression. And around it, the siding bowed slightly outward, like the impact had come from outside pushing in. The sheriff's deputy was professional, took photos, took a report, said he'd follow up. I gave him the trail camera footage from the northeast corner. 11 months of it. He took the drive. I never got it back. The follow-up call I got 2 weeks later lasted 4 minutes. The deputy said they hadn't found anything actionable. I asked about the footage. He said the camera must have had a storage issue because the drive was showing corrupted files. I bought a new camera, mounted it in a different location. I've got 1.5 years of footage on it now. I check it every morning. We don't go outside after dark. That's not a rule we discussed or decided on. It just became true, the way certain things become true after a specific night. Not a policy, not a fear, just a fact about how we live now. The dog goes out before sunset. The doors are locked by 8. We've never talked about leaving. Sometimes I think about the man in the green van and his binoculars trained on the tree line, and I wonder if he was looking for the same thing I've been looking for ever since. And I wonder if he found it first. I'm not the kind of person who tells stories like this. Ask anyone who knows me. I'm the one at the table who raises an eyebrow when someone starts talking about what they saw in the woods or what they heard in the walls or whatever half-remembered nightmare they've decided deserves an audience. I'm a structural engineer. I spend my days calculating load tolerances and failure points. My whole professional life is built around the idea that things behave according to predictable rules, and when they don't, there's always a reason. Always. I'm telling you this because I need you to understand where I was coming from before I tell you what happened at that lake. I need you to know that I spent a long time, longer than I'm comfortable admitting, trying to find the load tolerance on what I saw, the failure point, the predictable rule underneath it. I haven't found one yet. There were 5 of us, me, my buddy Caleb, who I've known since college, his girlfriend Priya, a guy named Darren who worked with Caleb, and Darren's younger sister Tommy, who was visiting from out of state. Late July, a few summers back, Caleb had found the lake through someone he'd met on a hiking forum, a body of water in a remote section of eastern Kentucky that barely showed up on mapping apps and required about 4 miles of off-trail hiking through dense ridge terrain to reach. No campgrounds, no designated access, no cell service past the first 2 miles in. Just the kind of place that sounds like a logistics problem, plum, until you get there, and then it just looks like something out of a painting. We hiked in on a Friday morning and made camp on the eastern bank by early afternoon. The lake was bigger than I had expected, maybe a quarter mile across, the water dark and still and surrounded on 3 sides by forest that came right down to the waterline. Cold even in July, fed by underground springs, according to whoever had told Caleb about it. The kind of cold that makes your chest tight when you first get in. We set up tents, got a fire going, ate well. By sunset, the 5 of us were sitting on a flat rock at the water's edge, watching the light leave the sky, and there was nowhere on earth I would have rather been. The first thing I noticed was the quiet. Not peaceful quiet. The other kind. I've camped enough to know that a healthy forest at dusk has a sound to it. Birds cycling through their evening calls, insects, the general low-frequency rustle of things moving through undergrowth. This lake didn't have that. Sitting on that rock watching the water go dark, I realized I hadn't heard a single bird since we'd come over the last ridge. No insects either, which in late July in Kentucky is not just unusual, it's wrong. I didn't say anything. They filed it somewhere in the back of my head under worth noting and let it sit there. Saturday was warm and clear, and by noon we were all in the water. The cold was sharp enough to take your breath, but once you'd been in a few minutes, your body adjusted and it felt incredible. That specific physical relief of cold water on hot skin after hiking. We were maybe 30 feet from shore, spread out, talking and laughing. Priya was floating on her back. Darren was out the deepest, maybe 50 feet from shore, treading water. Then Priya went under. Not in the way people go under when they duck beneath the surface voluntarily. There was no warning, no intake of breath. She was there and then she wasn't, and the surface closed over where she'd been without much disturbance. It happened fast enough that for a half second nobody reacted. That lag between seeing something and your brain accepting it. Then she came back up, screaming. Not screaming words, just screaming. She was moving toward shore in this frantic, barely controlled thrash, and when she got shallow enough to stand, she turned around and looked at her arm, and I could see even from where I was that something had happened to it. 3 parallel lacerations from just below the elbow to the wrist, deep, already bleeding in thin red lines down her forearm. We got her to shore. Caleb was asking what happened, and Priya kept saying something grabbed me, and I was looking at the cuts and trying to reconcile the geometry of them. Straight, parallel, evenly spaced, with the bite pattern of anything I could think of. It wasn't a bite. I knew that immediately. The spacing was wrong for teeth. They were linear, like something had been drawn across her skin rather than closed around it. We'd almost convinced ourselves it was a snag. Submerged branch, old fence wire, some debris we hadn't seen, when Darren started yelling. Same thing. Pulled under. Back up in seconds, and he had matching lacerations on his calf. 4 of them this time, same geometry. He said it very quietly, which was somehow worse than the screaming. Something grabbed my leg. It had fingers. We got out of the water, all of us. Nobody suggested staying in. We set up a basic first aid situation on shore, cleaned the wounds as well as we could with what we had. Both sets of lacerations were deep, but not arterial. Serious enough to warrant hospital attention. Not serious enough to override the 4 miles of rough terrain between us and the trailhead. We agreed to spend the night and leave at first light with full daylight for the hike out. That was the decision I've gone over the most. The fire that night felt smaller than it should have. We kept it built up, but the dark around us felt like it had density to it, like it was pushing back against the light, rather than just being the absence of it. Nobody was sleeping. We were all sitting around the fire, talking in the way people talk when they're trying to paper over fear with the sound of their own voices, and at some point the talking just stopped. One by one, and we sat there in the quiet that wasn't peaceful. and I was staring at the water. The lake surface was glassy, no wind, perfectly flat. Something broke the surface about 40 feet out. Not a splash, not a disturbance. It just came up slowly, like something that had been standing on the bottom and decided to straighten up. And it kept coming up, well past the point where a person's head and shoulders would have cleared the water line. It was dark, and I was across a fire-lit campsite, looking at a black lake, so I want to be honest about the limits of what I could actually see. But what I could see was a shape, large, very large. The eyes, and I'm going to just say eyes because I don't know what else to call them, caught the firelight from 40 feet away and gave it back in a color that wasn't quite a reflection. More amber than orange, low, too far apart. It didn't move toward us. It just stood there. Nobody at that fire said a word. I became aware of a sound, very low, almost below hearing, something I felt more in my sternum than heard with my ears. Rhythmic, patient. Tommy stood up. And that was enough. That one movement broke whatever we'd all been locked into, and we grabbed what we could grab in 30 seconds. Car keys, headlamps, Priya's medical bag, and we went. Into the trees, up the ridge, in the dark. 4 miles of terrain we'd barely navigated in daylight with headlamps and zero conversation, and the specific kind of focus that comes when some part of your body has taken over from your brain and decided that moving is the only acceptable option. We made the trailhead in under 2.5 hours. I don't entirely know how. Darren and Priya went to a hospital. Priya needed 8 stitches, Darren 12. The attending physician documented the wounds as lacerations of unknown origin and asked twice, in 2 different ways, whether anyone had been involved in an altercation. We said no. He wrote animal contact, unconfirmed, and moved on. We filed a report with the county sheriff. A deputy took our information and did not appear to be hearing anything new, which I noticed, and which Caleb noticed, and which neither of us mentioned until we were driving home. The deputy asked which lake, and when we described the access route, the ridge, the 4 miles off trail, he wrote something down and said someone would look into it. To my knowledge, nobody followed up. 3 weeks later, Caleb went back with a friend who'd agreed to make the hike. They found the campsite, or what was left of it. Every tent, like 3 of them, was destroyed. Not collapsed. Destroyed, the fabric torn, and the poles snapped. The cooler we'd left was 30 feet from where we'd positioned it, cracked open, empty. The flat rock at the water's edge, where we'd sat the first evening, had something on it. A smell, Caleb said. He couldn't describe it except to say it smelled old, like something that had been wet for a very long time and had stopped smelling like water. He didn't go to the water's edge. Neither of them did. I've looked at every large aquatic species documented in eastern Kentucky: catfish, snapping turtles, the occasional reported sighting of introduced alligator gar. I've looked at wound patterns. I've looked at documented eye shine in wildlife photography, the tapetum lucidum, the spectrum of reflective colors across known species. Nothing fits, not all of it together. And the thing I keep coming back to, and the thing that sits with me on the night side, rather it didn't, isn't the shape in the water or the lacerations or even the sound I felt in my chest more than heard. It's that the deputy wasn't surprised.